This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. On today's episode, I'm sharing the 6 relationship warning signs you really don't want to overlook, as well as some advice for things you can do to get your relationship back on track if any one of them have been present lately. I'm glad you're here today, and I have lots of good stuff in store for you. But first, a little introduction. We're currently listening to the band Fox Wedding with their song Too Little, Too Late, which I thought was a nice atmospheric intro for us today. And if this is your first time listening, I'm so glad you're here. I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. I'm the founder and clinical director of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed psychologist, a board certified coach, and I specialize in helping people have healthy relationships. So I have a lot of insight into the relationship warning signs that you really do want to take seriously. And I'm going to be sharing those with you today. Here's why I wanted to make a podcast on this topic in particular. If you've listened to this show before, you have heard me say many times that all relationships are really a mixed bag. No one is perfect, and every couple in the history of the world has growth opportunities, moments when they're not in perfect alignment, times when they probably even feel frustrated with each other and even very annoyed about many things. And this is actually normal. These are just opportunities to understand your partner better, to grow in your capacity to love and respect someone who is different from you, and also practice healthy communication skills that help you build bridges to the center, even if that center is not being in 100% alignment or agreement all the time. These things are absolutely normal and actually wonderful opportunities for people to grow together. And that's the goal of a lot of couples counseling and relationship coaching, like what we do here at my practice, Growing Self. And it is also true that well before a relationship really starts to disintegrate to the point where it's difficult to repair, there are early warning signs that you're heading in that direction. And it's really important to know what those warning signs are so that you can understand, oh, this is not like normal relationship turbulence. This is actually a sign that we need to do something differently. We need to take positive action as a couple to get ourselves back on track, because if we don't do something about this, it's going to get worse, and it could actually lead to the failure of our relationship. This is super important because, I have been a marriage counselor for a long time, coming up on 2 decades. I can't even believe that it's gone that fast. But I've also been married for a really long time. My husband and I recently had our 25th wedding anniversary. Would you believe? Yes, I got married young, but still, it's a long time. And what I have learned from both of these experiences is that there is a point of no return for relationships, and there is a window of opportunity for growth in relationships. My husband and I were personally lucky enough that, shortly after we got married, really, we ran into a rough patch. We were having a hard time. It was very hard to talk with each other. We were not getting along, and nobody was having fun. And we're lucky enough to get involved with some really good marriage counseling early on. I think it opened both of our eyes to many things. And this was, mind you, well before I went to counseling school and became a marriage counselor myself. That was actually quite a bit later. But during that experience, we were able to develop insights about each other, ways of talking to each other, and just a new perspective that really, I think, was instrumental in allowing us to have all of the wonderful years together that we've had sense. And thankfully, I think the reason why we were able to have as good of an experience as it was is because, we'd only been married for a couple of years. Like, we still fundamentally had a lot of positive regard for each other. There were many things about each other that we both liked. And even though things had been feeling difficult, it was hard, not going to lie, but there was still enough trust and love and respect and like foundational, positive relationship things going on, that it was relatively easy to have conversations about what wasn't feeling good for each of us. We were still able to have empathy for each other's perspective, and extremely regrettable things that are super hard to repair had not happened, thankfully. In contrast, and what I've learned since, and I'm not even talking to you as a marriage counselor right now, I am talking to you as a friend. It breaks my heart when I have people reach out to me professionally or show up at our practice wanting marriage counseling or couples therapy, who waited longer than they should have to get help for their relationship. They were not aware of how serious the problems really were in the early stages, when they began happening. They told themselves that it was no big deal. This is normal. It'll get better after, circumstances change or XYZ, made lots of excuses to not do something about it at earlier stages. And when they finally did show up for help, it was because it had gotten so bad that somebody was threatening to leave or filing for divorce or had, done something, gotten entangled with another person. There had been a betrayal of one kind or another, or that things had just simply felt so bad for such a long time that it had eroded the fundamental trust, positive regard that people had for each other. And what this does is that over time, it actually changes your core belief about who your partner is, to the point where it can be very difficult to rewrite that story because you have a lot of evidence to support whatever negative things you've been telling yourself about your partner, because your relationship has been not great for a long time. And I'm telling you, as a marriage counselor, best marriage counselor in the world, doesn't matter, whether or not they use an evidence-based approach or if they are a talented marriage counselor or if whatever, there is a point where if an attachment is damaged and damaged and damaged and damaged over and over and over again, and people, especially one person in the relationship, is trying to make positive change, like saying, hey, I think we need to take this seriously. I'm not having fun. This doesn't feel good. We need to do something, and is getting dismissed or brushed off over and over and over again. It erodes to the point that there is no there to put back together. And it is really important, therefore, and why I wanted to make this episode for you, so that you can understand what is normal relationship friction that is probably okay. Not that we can let everything go. I think we all have a responsibility to the people that we love to be growing and evolving throughout our lives and trying to be as loving and compassionate partners as we can be, which means always, working on things and trying to have a nice time. But again, relationships have ebbs and flows, and it also doesn't mean that anything catastrophic is happening because you're experiencing some of those. But again, there are certain kinds of interactions that are the bell is tolling. They are the drum beats on the horizon, and they're only going to get closer. And so I wanted you to know what those things are. So if those are happening, even at the earliest stages, actually, especially at the earliest stages, so that you can do something about it and learn and grow together and go on for many, many happy years in the future that will be happier because you've gone through this experience together and you learned new things about yourself and each other in the process, and you made some improvements. So That's the other thing that I just want you to keep in mind as I'm talking about these 6 signs that your relationship is in trouble. Again, just because they are happening does not mean that your relationship is past the point of repair. It just means that it's time to do something about them. And particularly if we're taking care of these in the early stages, the prognosis is excellent. It's like cancer treated early. You have the lumpectomy, little radiation, all good. Everybody's fine. You live to be 98. It's when you let stuff go and don't make the appointment and don't get stuff checked out and you roll in 4 years later and now you have a big problem. Relationship stuff is just like that. And again, the great news is that if these things are present in your relationship, addressing them productively will make your relationship stronger than it would have been. So it is going through the experience of working on this stuff is how happy, strong couples get that way. They are working on this stuff with each other. So this is all good things, has the potential to be good things. But again, we need to do something about it. And so one thing I would like to just present along the lines of growth is that I think being in a relationship is kind of like yoga in some ways. Don't know if you're a yoga person, but there's this like yoga saying that if it feels too easy all the time, it probably means you're not doing it right. And relationships, again, can be a little bit like this. When we're in healthy, growing relationships, you can expect to feel challenged sometimes, and you can expect that your relationships will invite you to grow in positive ways. And what growth feels like is a little bit of friction, a little bit of pushback, some differences of opinion, and even, some conflict. Things can flare up. And the reason why this is part of the growth process is because whenever these things happen in a healthy relationship, it means that either you are having a reaction to something that is worth exploring with open curiosity, asking yourself, why do I feel this way right now? That self-awareness component. I just had a reaction to that. Why is that? And it's a real doorway into your own personal growth process. What is the core belief I am holding about the situation? What is the personal value that I have that maybe I wasn't consciously aware of that's leading me to judge or react the circumstance in the way that I am? And how do I manage my own emotions in a healthy way, perhaps soothing myself if I'm getting angry or kind of restoring balance so that I am able to communicate in a productive way that my partner can hear, right? So all of these, whenever we have any relational conflict, is a real opportunity of growth for us. And furthermore, a wonderful opportunity to get to know your partner at a more emotionally intimate level. They perceive this situation differently than I do. Why is that? What is it about their perspective, the way they're thinking, their core beliefs, their values, their life experiences that have led them to this place that's different from mine? Why do they have these reactions in this situation? And having open conversations about all of these things is what developing a stronger relationship feels like. It is the experience of emotional intimacy. And so when you are having opportunities to do this with your partner, it is not a problem. It is not a bug. It is a feature. And sometimes, again, people, when they have these differences, will label it in their minds as conflict or arguing, and it certainly can get nasty. I mean, the way you handle these moments definitely makes a big difference. But just for the purposes of this conversation, I would like to invite you to consider that it is because of these experiences that emotional intimacy and emotional safety are created, and a depth of understanding and a strong bond is created. It can feel like obstacles in your path. They're not obstacles. They are literally the path. So embrace all of these things with a healthy growth mindset, and your relationship will flourish. So, with that being said, the things that you want to pay attention to that are different than what I just described, and that are actually those like early warning signs that the trouble is brewing, are some specific emotional experiences. And one of them is the experience of resentment. And so, what I think of as resentment is this experience that we have when there has been usually a problem or a hurt feeling or an unmet need or that it isn't just that something feels problematic, it's that it feels enduringly problematic, and that there hasn't been any movement towards resolution. That's what breeds resentment. So like if you talked about something and everybody said sorry, and like kind of gave it lip service, but either deep down you don't feel like you were heard or fundamentally understood, nor has the problem been solved. Like it's still there. Even though you've talked about it, it's out in the open, but it keeps happening and happening and happening. And you keep feeling bad about it. And you also don't trust that it won't happen again, right? That is the life experience that breeds resentment. And so the fact of resentment is not in itself problematic. It's like, I'd like for you to think of your emotions as being like any other physical senses, right? When you have a feeling about something, it's just a source of information. It's like your sense of smell. I took a whiff of that chicken salad and I think it might be off. It's like, so feelings of resentment, exact same thing. There's a problem here. There's a splinter in our relationship that has not yet been removed. And so my emotional guidance system is telling me that this is actually still a problem. And until it is different or acknowledged in a different way, I'm not going to feel great. So all it is like we have to do something. But if you don't pay attention to that feeling and allow it to guide you to having solution-focused conversations or doing things as a couple that actually solve the problem, it will begin to change the way you behave towards your partner. And if you're not talking about it, if you are experiencing that internal resentment but not addressing it really openly, you will start to become hostile, uncommunicative, short-tempered, less generous, more unloving, less patient, more irritable. It's like an itchy sweater. I think the analogy of having like a splinter under your skin that's just kind of like low-grade irritating, that is what it's like to be walking around with resentment all the time. And what happens is that if you're in this place and it is changing your behavior, and over time you're becoming less empathetic, less positive, less kind, less affectionate towards your partner because of it, because relationships are systems, if you are tolerating unresolved resentment and it's changing your behavior, your partner will begin to experience you in a way that elicits really negative responses in them. So you're unloving, you're not kind, you're not generous, you're not patient, and your partner will begin changing their behavior towards you in response. Now, you may say, but the reason I am feeling resentful is because of something that they did or the way they handled it, which led to my resentful feelings in the first place. And that's why I'm not being very nice to them. So is it really fair for them to not be nice to me in response? We could go there if you wanted to. It is not productive in terms of improving your relationship, that, well, whose fault is this really? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And if you are feeling resentful about something in your relationship, it is your responsibility to be initiating conversations with your partner about your feelings in a productive way that lead to resolution. If you're not able to do that with your partner, if it turns into a fight, if it turns into a more invalidation or more making promises that are then not kept, that isn't good enough. And you really need to do something more. And my recommendation is that that's a really good sign to take this in front of a competent marriage counselor who can help you figure out what is going on that is making it so hard to resolve the situation. You could learn that your partner has been harboring feelings of resentment towards you that is making it difficult for them to make positive changes in your direction. That, maybe they are having an internal experience as well that's impacting their ability to be affectionate or generous towards you. And again, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter like where any of these things start, but when resentment is present, it needs a lot of fresh air and sunlight and open conversations to get to the core of it and to find productive solutions that either heal old hurts that maybe haven't been processed fully. That can be a huge source of resentment, actually. I mean, sometimes it's like, things that are happening in day-to-day life that are perpetual problems that just don't feel good. And we really do need to find a change for those. Sometimes the answer to resolving resentment in a more complete way is developing a new perspective, new tolerance, and new understanding for a partner. So even though things don't change necessarily day to day in the relationship, you don't feel resentful about it anymore. That is an absolutely valid path forward. And it could also be that the origin of resentment is actually emotional in nature. There was something that happened between the two of you, and we all want to tell ourselves that the past is in the past and that was a long time ago and it's not happening now. So can we all just forget it and move on and have a nice time? And that is actually not how humans work. There is such a thing as relational trauma, as attachment trauma. And if you have experienced those things in the past and they weren't adequately healed, it will continue to be almost like an infected wound until it's gone back into and cleaned out properly and healed properly. And that often takes professional support to accomplish. So if resentment is there, that is a major warning sign and it requires intervention. And I hope you get help. Another one of the 6 signs that your relationship is in trouble is if communication consistently feels very difficult and very unproductive. Like if every time something comes up or you try to have a conversation about something that isn't like very high level and basic, like how was your day? Or it's raining outside, pass the salt. If you're trying to talk about anything more meaningful than that and it's like irritable and voices get raised or people shut down and you're not able to talk about important things, or if it feels like there's almost like a punishing quality to relationship conversations, like people are saying nasty things, it feels toxic, if it feels like, trying to hurt each other, that is a huge relationship warning sign, because it is impossible to solve any problems or like reconnect or build those bridges back to the center without a certain degree of productive communication around it. Couples who are able to stay calm and stay receptive to what the other is saying, to be able to take somebody else's viewpoint and consider it, to put themselves in the other person's shoes, to listen in a way that helps their partner feel understood, and certainly to be able to talk, in a way that authentically communicates your feelings, but in a non-hurtful way. Those are fundamental relationship skills. And without them, you can't resolve any of the normal relationship problems that you are probably experiencing, because all couples do. And just for the record, I am not talking about a snappy comment sometimes, or, if you really want to talk about something right this very second and your partner doesn't, they've had a long day. Like we're all humans, right? And we need to make space for sometimes people not being perfectly perfect in relationships. What I'm talking about is like a consistent pattern of unproductive communication. If people reject what you're saying, if people are hostile in response to what you're saying, even if you're trying to be careful, if people are avoiding having conversations, shutting you down, or certainly if it turns into like a contest, somebody's winning, like you're talking about how you feel and somebody's saying, no, that's not what happened. Let me tell you what happened. And it's like, who's right? That is a real warning sign, particularly if it feels like it's turning into a pattern. And so if this is happening and you've tried to do what you can to be an emotionally safe communicator, which means asking your partner open-ended questions about how they feel. I've noticed this happens when we try to talk to each other. What goes on for you in those moments? Like there are ways of broaching this in a non-confrontational relationship building kind of way. If your partner won't have those conversations with you, or is kind of on that hair trigger of reactivity, or if you are noticing yourself becoming elevated in these moments when your partner's trying to talk to you about things to the point where you're not able to stay in the ring, or if you're shutting down, if you're saying mean things, even though in the moment you might tell yourself that you're entitled to react this way because of XYZ that your partner is doing, you're still doing the things. And this needs to change if you want to have a healthy relationship with this person. So it would be a very wise decision to, as soon as you possibly can, get in the office of a very good couples counselor, marriage counselor, to talk about how you're communicating with each other, and to get, some practical skills for how to do this differently, not just in the couples counseling office, but outside of it as well. And so just to tell you, I would never recommend that you go looking for a relationship coach, just a relationship coach, because there is zero education, credentialing, training required for anybody to call themselves a coach. So if you go looking for a relationship coach, it's highly likely you're going to connect with somebody who has decided they are great at relationships and have a lot to say on the subject. And yes, I'll be a relationship coach, but don't have any education or credentialing. And same with like a life coach. I would say it's a BS credential, but you don't even need a credential. So it's not even that. What I would encourage you to find is a licensed marriage and family therapist. So somebody who specializes in relationships and who does have education, training, credentialing around relationships, and who uses relationship coaching as a modality to help their couples and families improve communication, specifically because communication skills and strategies are very coachable. It's really sometimes a matter of people learning what to do differently in the moments. Insight is not enough. Yes, my father was a very emotional communicator and my mother always hid in her bedroom. Therefore, I do the same things. Cool. Great to know that about yourself. It is not going to change one single thing about what you do because you've connected those dots. It is really around, when I feel this way, here's what I need to do in order to have a positive interaction with my partner or my people. So it's very much more of a coaching modality. And it also really goes into emotional intelligence coaching, which is understanding how you feel, what is going on inside of me. How can I manage those feelings so that I can stay in a relatively calm receptive place when I'm talking to other people, or remove myself from the situation for a little while in order to be able to get to that place and telling people what I'm doing. I'm feeling escalated. I don't know if I can do this with you right now. I'm going to go walk around the block and I will be back in 15 minutes. And when I am, I really want to finish this conversation. So those are all emotional intelligence skills. It's how you're regulating yourself. The third component of emotional intelligence is understanding how other people feel to a certain degree of accuracy. So having empathy, being able to have insight into the thinking of others, to be able to see the situation through another person's eyes. Not that you have to agree with it, but to understand it, because then you are able to do the fourth component of emotional intelligence, which is having a certain degree of insight and confidence to communicate with another person in such a way that takes their perspective into consideration. And so all of this is what goes into healthy communication coaching. And there's a lot here. So it's really worth connecting with a professional who does emotional intelligence coaching, communication coaching, relationship coaching. Do work, though, with a legitimate professional, not somebody who's really good at TikTok who has decided to be a relationship coach. But very important to address that because without it, relationships will just not even disintegrate. They'll just fly apart. I mean, with no communication, there is no path forward. Let's put it that way. Okay, the third very important relationship warning sign that you have to take into consideration is if you are noticing that either your internal narrative about your partner is starting to shift in a very negative direction, or if your partner's internal narrative about you is starting to shift into a very negative direction. If you are saying things to yourself like, there's no point in talking about it, they won't change anyway, they don't care, they are fundamentally incompatible with me, they just want different things out of life, they are emotionally stunted and incapable of emotional intimacy, they can't communicate with me, I will never get my needs met by this person. And if you're sort of lining this up in your mind as being because they have all these unresolved issues from their childhood, or because they might have Asperger's, I mean, like people can tell themselves all kinds of stuff to make sense of their partner. But if it's turning into this narrative where it is about your partner's kind of fundamental character or who they are on core levels, that is such a major relationship warning sign. It means that you are starting to get pretty far down that path of relationship like atrophy, right? If you go too far in that direction, you can't come back. So when you notice that happening inside of yourself, it's time to say, whoa, I am telling myself all these things about my partner. This is a very serious relationship warning sign. I will tell you, just as a counselor, as a marriage counselor, it is normal for people to begin like finding reasons to explain the experiences that they're having in relationships. And I will also tell you that, and I'm sure if we like think about this from the other direction, there is a very well-known psychological principle that when we behave badly or in ways that other people don't like, or that when we do certain things, we are able to justify all of our behaviors because we are responding to circumstances, or we were in a bad mood, or these things happened, or, there's all this stuff. It's that our way of behaving is attributable to circumstances or whatever. It is not because of our character, right? But when it comes to other people, it is very easy to take what they're doing as a sign of their character and not give them the same sort of level of consideration or empathy that we give ourselves when we do certain things, because it can be hard to have insight into somebody else's mind, right? So referring back to step 2 of what we were just talking about. But that's bad when that starts to happen. When I hear that happening in couples counseling sessions, I know that the risk of people breaking up or divorcing is quite high. And I talk about that. And sometimes we can pull it back together and sometimes we can't. If also you are noticing that your partner is saying things about you, either to you or to other people, or treating you like they believe that you are a fundamentally bad person, they don't expect good things from you, they aren't trying to talk with you about stuff because they're expecting that you'll have a very bad reaction, they are sort of making sweeping statements about your character, you have to get the two of you into a marriage counselor's office ASAP. People who get divorced, it is not uncommon at all for one person to, show up and tell me that it was sudden, it was out of the blue, they felt so blindsided, right? They didn't see it coming. And when we start to get in there and peel the onion and they start talking to me about the experiences that they have, usually a couple years before somebody asked for a divorce, this shift in narrative was present. And they didn't understand how serious it was until it was too late. So I'm not trying to be scary. I'm trying to be serious and real and give you the information straight. So there you have it. Another very important relationship warning sign that you want to pay attention to is if you notice that either of you are talking to everybody but each other. So if your best friend / mother / sister / person in the cubicle next to you knows more about how you feel about your relationship or anything else in your life than your partner does, that is a big relationship warning sign. And also, if you get the sense that other people in your partner's life know more about their emotional landscape or their feelings about you than you do, you have to pay attention to that, because there's a very well-known other psychological principle. It's called triangling. And what it refers to is that if person A has a problem with person B, but is either conflict avoidant or feels worried about having a potentially intense conversation, worries that it might turn into a fight, worries that they will be rejected, so many different reasons. It can be much, much, much more comfortable to tell somebody else about how you feel about that situation. And it meets some of the emotional need. You feel like you've kind of released the steam valve just a little bit, but it has done literally nothing to change anything about your relationship. And it can feel like you're trying to talk about it, right? You're very clear about how you feel. Other people know all about it. It can feel like your partner should know how you feel because you're very clear about how you feel and you're talking about it, just not with them, right? Which can actually lead to feelings of resentment when it perpetuates. So even though you're complaining to your best friend and nothing changes with your spouse, you can feel more and more resentful because it persists. And I will say something, and this is true about therapists, particularly individual therapists. There are situations where talking to your therapist about all the things that you're annoyed about in your relationship, which is a very common thing to do, and it's also fine in some levels, but it can make your relationship problems worse rather than better, because you're essentially triangling about your relationship problems with your therapist instead of with your partner. And individually trained therapists, so licensed psychologists, a licensed professional counselor, if you're working with a licensed clinical social worker, these people are trained as individual therapists. Their function is the diagnosis and treatment of mental health conditions most of the time. It is not systemic relational work the way that a marriage and family therapist conceptualizes it. So I'm a licensed psychologist and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am highly aware when I have an individual client who wants to come in and tell me all this stuff about their partner and what they're doing and not doing and how they feel about it. I always say, have you told this to your partner? If your partner was here in the room with us right now, would they be surprised to hear you telling me any of the things you are today? And they're like, well, no. And then I will say, have you said this out loud to your partner in words? And they will say, no. And it's important, right? Because again, we feel like stuff is out in the open when we're telling it to somebody else. And it is easy to lose sight of the fact that your partner literally doesn't know how you feel or what you want or what you need until you say it out loud to them in words. So be very aware of who you're talking to about how you're feeling. If it feels like you would like to talk to your partner about it, but either of the things that we've talked about previously are at play, either you have a very negative narrative about what would happen if you tried. It won't matter anyway. They don't care. It will be invalidated. That is another warning sign. Or if the communication between the two of you has deteriorated to the point where it actually would be an unproductive and bad experience for you if you tried to talk to your partner, all of these are signs that there's really serious stuff going on, particularly if more than one of these things are happening, you have to deal with it. And if you're noticing that your partner is doing this and not talking to you and seeming to talk about other people, totally okay to have a conversation about that. And though being receptive to it, right? I noticed that it seems like you're talking to your mom and your friend about how you feel about these things. And it seems like I might not know as much about your inner landscape as some of these other people do. And I'd really like to know you. I would love it if I was your confidant and you told me how you felt. Is there anything, and you could say, why maybe is that? Or even proactively ask the question, is there something about the way I respond to you or the way that I seem to you that makes it hard for you to feel like you can do that with me? And expect that you might learn some new things if you're doing a good job of being emotionally safe. There may well be a reason why you're not the first person that your partner wants to talk to. And it's really, really good that you know that, because then you can do something about that. Thank you so much for telling me. I've just become aware that I need to work harder to be a better friend to you so that we can have a more emotionally intimate relationship, because I'd really like to do that. So this is all good stuff, but we have to address it. Okay. The fifth sign that your relationship is in trouble is if any one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are galloping through your living room. So Dr. John Gottman is a very well-known researcher, writer, trainer in the field of marriage and family therapy. He's done a ton of just excellent work looking at what are components of a healthy, strong relationship and comparing that with components of a relationship that is in trouble. And he has identified 4 behaviors in particular that are so fundamentally toxic to a relationship when they happen that he has coined them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so if any of these are happening in your relationship, it's really important to be aware of it and be like, oop, this is a sign we need to go get some help. They are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and avoidance. They all kind of tie into the things that we've been talking about so far. I mean, criticism is a highly negative communication style, right? I mean, at its core, people are angry and kind of blaming other people and this XYZ, let me tell you about all the things that you're doing wrong. it can be resolved with emotional intelligence coaching, with communication coaching, and finding more productive ways to talk about issues, right? Issues need to be talked about. Criticism is never helpful. So if there's finger pointing happening, pay attention with that. Contempt is another major one. And contempt is this, can be like sort of illustrated like as an eye roll, right? If somebody is talking to you and you're like, ugh, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, that is the experience of contempt. And the reason why contempt is so destructive, part of it is the behavior itself. When you're showing someone that you have contempt for them, it's a highly toxic behavior. But it also, when contempt is present, means that there's that extremely negative internal narrative that is already started to happen. Like that's why contempt happens. So contempt is like the behavior that will show you that you have that narrative shift. Defensiveness is another of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so defensiveness is like rejecting somebody else's experience, somebody else's feelings. That's not what happened. It is displacing blame. It is making excuses. It is arguing back with someone. All of these are kinds of defensiveness. And what it really is a rejection of somebody else's, what they're trying to communicate to you in favor of whatever it is that you are thinking or feeling or your perspective. It's like, no, whatever I'm thinking or feeling is more important than what you're thinking or feeling. And so let me tell you about why I'm right and you're wrong. That's defensiveness. It is a communication style. It is also, though, kind of a way of relating to other people that can have roots in things like anxiety and even some attachment stuff. So it's very important that we crack into defensiveness and able to change that. Lastly, another of the 4 horsemen is avoidance. So refusing essentially to have conversations or pacifying your partner, telling them whatever they want to hear or whatever you think they want to hear so that you can end this conversation as quickly as possible. It is also a form of rejection. It is also highly toxic, but it is a much quieter kind of things. It's never a good time to talk. That was a long time ago. That's over. It's different now. It's really this like communication of, no, I will not stay in the ring with you to talk about something, to solve a problem with you. And it really feels like an emotional rejection of your partner. The person who is avoidant, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, often is having an internal experience. They're feeling anxious. They're feeling like they're trying to protect the relationship through their avoidant behavior. They feel like it's the right thing to do because it will prevent a conflict sometimes. Sometimes people who grow up in highly conflictual homes can have this almost like triggering response where they have to get out of anything that feels like a conflict ASAP because it just feels really overwhelming. And we can understand all of these things with empathy, and the behavior of avoidance itself is quite destructive to relationships. So if this is happening in yours, it's really important that you take this in front of someone so that it can be resolved. Yeah. And very lastly, the 6th warning sign that your relationship is really in trouble is if, and this may sound like ridiculously obvious, but if one of you is saying things like they think it might be too late, it might not be. I don't know. But on the off-ramp of a relationship, so when relationships are really sort of spiraling towards the point of no return, when they finally do end, it is almost invariably because one person has lost hope that things can get better. They have tried to talk to you. They have tried to get things to change. I don't know how effectively they've been trying to do that. Maybe they've been telling their mother about how they feel about you or their therapist, right? Maybe their way of communicating with you hasn't been ideal and it's been difficult for you to respond in positive ways to them. So not saying that it is just the one person's fault, but what still has happened is that one person has felt like they have done everything that they know how to do, and there is no hope that things can get better. Their internal narrative has shifted into this space where we're done. I'm done. I've tried everything. There's no hope. Doesn't matter anyway. Doesn't matter. If it does get better, it still wouldn't be good enough. Therefore, I am no longer willing to keep doing this. So I'm going to go. That's what the internal narrative turns into, at the very final stages of this. They've just lost hope that their partner can love them in the way that they need to be loved, or that they could have the kind of connection and the kind of relationship that they would like to have. So again, at a certain point that is done, and I don't want to say we can't ever put Humpty Dumpty back together again, because, all things are possible. And I've seen some cool stuff happen, so won't say it's impossible. But again, remember that relationships, they don't just explode usually. Sometimes if somebody's been having an affair, there's some crazy, horrible thing yes, fine, they explode. But 95% of the time, there is an off-ramp that lasts for many months, sometimes years, where one person is just kind of going further and further and further away from the inside out. You might not always be able to see it or know it, but you can usually feel it. And the relationship warning signs that we've been talking about today are indications that they're on that off-ramp. And certainly if they are ever saying things like, maybe we're just too different, or it doesn't matter, things won't change anyway, or maybe we would just be happier with other people. People can say stuff like that as they're in the process of working things out in their own mind. And if you ever hear your partner saying those kinds of things, or saying those things to yourself, just know that that is the process of what it feels like internally to be working yourself out of an attachment to a person. And just because you're having those thoughts or feelings, or your partner is, doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship has passed the point of no return. You can have a bad fight and your partner could say, oh, maybe we're just too different, right? That's not totally outside the norm, but just the fact that that was a thought in their head means that whatever you're fighting about is something that you really should take seriously and get professional help to improve your relationship. Because I sure would hate for you guys to be, one of the couples that it is too late. There's a reason why I became an unintentional breakup recovery expert. You may have heard me on previous podcasts talk about the book I wound up writing as Exaholics, Breaking Your Addiction to an Ex-Love. And it is because over the years of experience as a marriage counselor, working with couples, and they would come in and one person has gone through all these stages that I've been telling you about today, and not really realizing how serious it was until it was too late. And certainly their partner not realizing what was happening until it was too late. And then being left with one person on my couch who is just heartbroken and who would do anything to get a redo. If only I'd understood sooner, if only we'd gone to marriage counseling 4 years ago when the stuff first started happening, it could have been different. And because it could have been different. And that sucks. And so I would not necessarily say that out loud to that poor heartbroken person sitting there on my couch, because I don't want to be unnecessarily cruel. But I will say this to you, my dear listener, because you are listening to a podcast about the 6 relationship warning signs you don't want to dismiss, the ones you want to pay attention to. And I really hope that this time that we spent together today has helped give you a new perspective and also some new ideas about what to do if any of this stuff is cropping up in your relationship, so that you can have a much happier ending to your story. I will tell you that before my husband and I got into marriage counseling all those years ago, certainly our communication was not good. We were, fighting more often than not. I certainly had started telling myself mean things about him. I was telling other people how I felt about him and the things that he was doing and not doing. And I certainly was feeling resentful. So all of those things were there. And thankfully, we did get help. We talked about it. We worked through it. We made positive changes. We learned how to talk to each other differently. And that was like 20 years ago. And, we've had some ups and downs since, but nothing ever like that. And I know for a fact that that can be true for you too. So be proactive, take these things seriously. And if you're ready to get help, please look for a licensed marriage and family therapist. Other kinds of therapists do not have the same specialized training and expertise in relationships, in communication, in systems, and attachment theory, and it makes a real difference in outcomes. So I hope that advice helps you too. Okay, my friends, thank you for spending this time with me today, and I'll be back in touch next time with another episode of the podcast. Take care.